Georgia is what Notre Dame wants to be when they grow up, Ryan Curley. I thought that was a pretty aggressive take from former Gator and ESPN analyst Chris Doring.
Yeah, aggressive is the exact way that I put it. I don't know if it's unprofessional, but we're pointing in that direction when we say things like that. He said it on TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, heading in that direction there. In terms of postseason success, yeah, right. At least recently,
That's a good
Georgia's
point.
done well in that regard, and Notre Dame hasn't. And something we saw as a common theme in the 14 playoff was that Notre Dame got there and was disappointing, get crushed by Clemson, get I don't. Did they play Alabama in the 14 playoff?
They got worked by
Get crushed by
Alabama.
Alabama. I mean, they got
Yeah.
crushed by Alabama in the 2012 national championship game. So they don't produce in these moments, and Georgia's produced at a very high level in the moment. So in that regard, yes. I mean, in terms of regular season success and kind of overall, I mean, Notre Dame's doing what it needs to do with the situation that we're in with college football and it not being in a conference. You saw that this year. They got their home playoff game and they did it. Now they got to go down to the Sugar Bowl and play the Dogs. They can change the way people think about them if they beat Georgia in a game like this.
Yeah, I think if Notre Dame wants to beat Georgia, then everyone should want to beat Georgia. They won 2 out of 3 national championships. So I'm not sure if it's just specifically Notre Dame is doing this or that, but I do think they've kind of built a team and a foundation that is similar to Georgia. They play really good defense. It's a collective group. They want to run the football, smash mouth type of football. And they've got a quarterback who can move. So, we've talked a little bit already about them being somewhat limited in the passing attack, but they want to get after it and they want to win games in the trenches and be a tough physical team that you can't run through, right? They want to run through you and stop the run. So in a way, they want to be built like that 21-22 Georgia team, right? They don't have the same type of talent and they haven't had that same success like Ryan talked about in the playoffs. But yeah, if you want to say Georgia's trying to be Notre Dame or vice versa, Notre Dame's trying to be Georgia, you can just put any team in that category because no one's had more success than Georgia over the past 3 years. So, I guess I get it, but still hot take season. So I understand why he said it.
Yeah. So what he was specifically talking about, I think he was probably talking about the stuff y'all were too, but where he was very specifically talking about was the physicality and all that. And I will say this, Matt, in the grand scheme of things, if it's so easy to do what not that's the wrong way to put it. It's not easy to do what Georgia did in 21 and 22 on the offensive and defensive lines, very specifically the defensive lines. It's hard to play that way and win, and we've seen that win in 23 and 24 for Georgia. I mean, they're not mauling people like they used to. One thing, Ryan, that you were talking about a minute ago, well, maybe Matt said it, but the quarterback at Notre Dame, I don't think he's had a game where he's thrown for more than 250. He's had almost as many touchdowns running it as he has passing it. I don't really know what to make of that. I mean, Georgia's seen dual threat guys, for lack of a better term. I would be concerned if I were Notre Dame that they would try to make me throw the ball the whole game. That they'll just say, I don't, we'll put as many as we need to in the box and we'll stop the run. And now you got to go execute against a pretty good secondary. I wouldn't compare these guys to a world class one, Ryan, but they're pretty good. Uh-oh, you're muted. Try it again. The Grinch got a
That's
hold of
why.
your mute button.
Yep, they got me. He hasn't thrown for 250 because he hasn't really had to.
I should have said that.
They
That's true.
haven't, for the most part, they haven't really been challenged. And outside of Northern Illinois, and he didn't throw for 250 that day either. It's been a long time since I've watched any of that game, but their scheme worked and it worked against Indiana, and they ran the ball okay, right? You eliminate the 98-yard touchdown.
You talking about Notre Dame?
Yeah,
well, that's a tricky thing. Let me just jump in
great.
to say this: you can't eliminate it, right? Like Mark Rick used to get really aggravated with that because it counts. But I agree with you. I mean, it wasn't like they weren't going for 7 and 8 all the time.
A lot of that game had to do with Indiana's just severe struggles on offense, and in particular the quarterback just not being accurate, especially at the beginning of the game. But that's the formula for Georgia is make them pass the ball, figure out a way to limit this run game. It's way simpler said than done. It's something that they struggled to do a handful of times this year, and it put them in dramatic situations multiple times. But they understand that, and they've had this it's almost a month where pretty sure it's Notre Dame, so they're scouting Notre Dame the whole time. Had to spend some time scouting Indiana as well, but now they get almost 2 weeks to hone in on that. It is simple. I mean, all you saw on Friday night was checkdowns, hitting little seams, hitting little 5 yard
They had the
outs.
one ball.
Nothing, right? So Georgia can kind of limit that the way that they did against Texas and just kind of let Quinn Ewers dink and dunk his way down the field, limit the run game. Easier said than done, but we've seen Georgia do that to an offense.
Yeah, I think if you're Notre Dame, you've got to figure out how to be explosive, because I don't see Notre Dame being super explosive against this Georgia defense, especially through the air. And like Ryan said, against Texas, who's been able to run through just about everyone, not named Georgia. Georgia stopped the run, and Texas couldn't do anything. And if Notre Dame gets into a situation like that, especially if they get down a score too early to Georgia, then you're going to have to ask, Riley Leonard to do something that, again, he hasn't done all year long, right? So they can try to do the nickel and dime thing, and that's kind of what they do. They want to have the ball, time of possession. I think they do a really good job of that.
They do.
They don't go 3 and out very often, so they do move the ball and they keep the ball. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to be explosive at some point in the game, probably multiple times if they want to come out and win. And I just don't see how they're going to be able to do that. Maybe they break off a long yard or a long run or two. But as we've seen, if teams are able to break off one giant run against the Dogs, usually that's it. And Georgia makes those adjustments. So,
but that was it for them against Indiana, Matt.
Yeah.
They didn't have a bunch of long runs.
I will say it felt like when the game was in hand early, they ran the ball and Indiana knew it. So they were just trying to get the game over with, work that clock. So I get why they weren't gashing them 7-8 yards. They didn't, of course they'd want to, but it's not the end of the world that they didn't. But they're going to have to get that going against the Dogs, because I just don't see them being able to have much of a passing attack against Georgia.
What about the notion, Matt, of Riley Leonard being Haynes King? I mean, besides the fact that he's literally not that person. I mean, Tech went for two. Tech was probably the most, well, it's not probably, factually speaking, they ran the ball the most on Georgia. It was the most effective by almost 70 yards. Tennessee ran it effectively. They have a great running back. Kentucky ran it effectively. They have that's sort of their style. Alabama, 173. Auburn, 137. I mean, there were teams that ran it against Georgia. I mean, but most people kind of clocked in about 100 to 115 yards. If Notre Dame goes for 115 against Georgia, I think they lose by 17.
Yeah, and the dual threat quarterbacks that Georgia's played, they're explosive, and
I was just going to say
in the pass game where Riley Leonard he can't. He's a bigger, kind of tougher quarterback to bring down, and he's pretty mobile and above average athleticism for his size. But I think Haynes King was a little quicker, Ryan, a little twitchier, and was a little slippier, I guess, just tough to corral. I thought he played like a warrior, and Riley Leonard is going to have to do the same. He's going to have to bring his A game. And what I mentioned earlier, I do think he made some nice plays around the line of scrimmage. There were a few times where I thought Indiana was going to sack him, and he just found a way to get that ball to the running back, to the tight end, get it out of his hands, and turned a play that could have been a -5, -6 yards into a 3-4 yard gain. And then an Indiana defender misses the tackle, then they go 7-8 more yards for a first game. It felt like we saw that kind of a lot. So he's a gamer, and he's a competitor. He's a smart kid. He's a veteran. But again, the arm talent and the lack of explosiveness that I think he brings through the air, I think could be really tough for them.
Yeah, and that's kind of what Georgia Tech did to Georgia. Haynes King just made the right play. They drew up a lot of play action, a lot of fakes on third down, and he just missed enough tackles to get certain throws out and just made a ton of plays. Common theme with all those teams that ran for a ton of yards against Georgia, they had explosive runs. Jarquez Hunter, that 50, 40, 60, something in that range yard run, big percentage of that total. Jalen Milroe had a 38, 40-yard touchdown run. He had a few explosive runs himself. It was a common theme across the board. Notre Dame does have that, and you saw it on Friday night. Jeremiah Love is a guy that can take it 98 yards, right? You don't see touchdowns like that very often, and there was real explosion on that play. So they have the guys. What they don't really have outside of one player who I think is pretty good, and I'm blanking on his first name, but his name is number 6, Faison.
Correct. The
receiver. He's good, and that's kind of what they have on the outside. And usually what it takes to beat Georgia is weapons that can really beat you out there and a quarterback that can really beat you. I have a hard time seeing the Georgia Tech result happen again, right? And it is kind of apples to apples in that situation, but Riley Leonard's not the athlete that Haynes King is, and I don't think he's as fast as shifty as you guys were mentioning. But it's the outside weapons that hurts Georgia a lot, and Notre Dame definitely lacks that.
Yeah, right. Haynes King threw for 300 yards against Georgia. So I don't think they're at all the same. Just to recap, Alabama had a 36-yarder from Jalen Milroe. I mean, Georgia has had a real hard time with Jalen Milroe, needless to say. Haynes King's along with 17, but Jamal Haynes kicked the game off, if people remember, with that 44-yarder, which should have been probably a 1-yard loss. And then I clicked Alabama twice. And then Kentucky, it was, the Auburn run, as you were saying, that run was, that was a long run. Jarquez Hunter had a 38-yarder. I mean, I'm talking about a 9-yard. I mean, Georgia has not given up a 50-yard run this year. Is that right? I'd have to go back and kind of stretch through it. But, yeah, look, man, I know that I know Georgia missed a lot of tackles against, very specifically against Tech, but I hadn't seen anything like the missed tackles that Indiana had. I mean, that was atrocious. And I don't see that happening for the Dogs. Make sure you're staying tuned. We'll be in New Orleans on Sunday to give you all the detail that you need from covering the program down there. We'll see the Irish and the Dogs down there. Thanks for watching.